as I mentioned, today, July 26th, 2020, is the actual 30-year anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and we're just really thankful and fortunate that we have such a great team that is going to be discussing how the ADA has impacted people generally, and specifically for those of us that are on the panel today. People all across America with both visible and invisible disabilities became protected from exclusion and discrimination in all of the major areas of our lives when that was signed into law on July 26th, 1990 by President George H.W. Bush. So it's something that has pushed forward the rights of persons with disabilities. And as I said, we're going to discuss how that applies to people who stutter as well. So first up, we're going to have some introductions. So we'll start off with myself. I'm Pamela Mertz. I sit on the board of the National Stuttering Association, and I serve as the Special Projects co-chair. And maybe some of you have been aware through Special Projects, we have done a number of activities and events through our flagship program, We Stutter at Work. And I'll ask the rest of my esteemed colleagues to introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. This is Nina G. It is a pleasure to be joining you all. I'm a comedian, author of this book, Stutter Interrupted, and also a disability activist, advocate, and really happy to be here. Carl.
Thanks, Nina. I had to get myself off mute there. Hey, everyone. My name is Carl Coffey. I'm a person who stutters. I serve with Pam on the NSA's board of directors as her co-chair of Special Projects. I work full-time as a consultant for United Healthcare, and I'm really excited to be joining such a great panel of folks.
Hey, everybody. My name is Jonah Otis, and I am an NSA chapter leader here in Portland, Oregon, and I'm also a people operations and disability inclusion program manager at PayPal.
And last but certainly not least, Alvin.
Hi, Alvin Terrell. I'm here in Omaha, Nebraska. I have been the chapter leader here for a number of years. I just gave that responsibility up, however, to Naomi Rogers. I think a number of you may know her. She recently moved to the area, so she's now the Omaha chapter leader. I'm an analyst at the Meteor Corporation, and I've kind of joined in their diversity and inclusion program. I'm also sometimes a comedian, although usually not intentional.
Thank you, Alvin. And just to point out, if it's not clear, down on the bottom of this screen, we have a very important disclaimer. This presentation was developed and will be presented based on the experiences of the 5 of us who stutter that are on the panel. We are not attorneys, so if you require any legal assistance in relation to any type of an ADA situation, you would need to contact an attorney. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Nina, who's gonna take us through our objectives and how the ADA came to be. Unmute yourself.
Unmute, there we go. So the objectives for our time together are going to include kind of a brief history of the ADA and some other disability activism that has happened throughout the years, the definition of disability protections under the ADA, a couple of case studies of stuttering and discrimination in the workplace, and then we'll move into more systemic changes that can be made within a corporation, within a community, in terms of including stuttering in diversity and inclusion initiatives, and some very robust programs that we will be talking about from some of our panelists. So the ADA was enacted July 26th, today, 1990. So happy 30th ADA. And the quote that is oftentimes shared that George H.W. Bush said is, "Let the shameful walls of exclusion finally come tumbling down." And the ADA is about breaking down barriers like a lot of civil rights laws. And civil rights laws, it is like a lot of civil rights laws in that it says that you can't discriminate in the workplace, in public areas, in many different ways. Communication is also part of this in terms of phone calls and communication to the world. But it's not only discrimination, but it's also accommodations, which makes it a difference between other kinds of civil rights acts. Then Bush #2, George Bush II, had amended the act in 2008. Unfortunately, a lot of the teeth, or some of the teeth, were taken out of the first ADA by the Supreme Court, so they had to amp that up a little bit, and that's actually the thing that really helped us as people who stutter. So this is a photo, and it's just one of my favorite photos of the ADA protests. And I'm not sure if it was a protest or the celebration, but you see people in here like Judy Heumann, who was recently featured in the documentary Crip Camp. And I suggest you all go check out that amazing film by Jim Lebrecht that is really about the community of people people with disabilities, and how that community gave them strength to go out and to advocate. And I know as a person who stutters, I related a lot of that to my own experience with the NSA, that you get that confidence and you get that core experience with your community, and the possibilities that come out of that are totally amazing. And what came out of that were our rights as people who stutter. It was these people who use wheelchairs, who used white canes, who used sign language, who were little people who are still with us now, and they continue to fight, but they're the ones who fought for our rights to be at our job, at our colleges, at our schools. And I'm just very thankful to them for the accessible path that they've paved.
Thank you, Nina. And I just want to just jump in and mention one other thing that we'll talk about probably in a couple places today, but it's really important, given that all these pioneers have paved the way for us, to recognize that a lot of people who stutter are not always comfortable using the word disability when we refer to or talk about our stuttering. But we need to feel comfortable owning and using the word, because when we don't, we then therefore lose out on the opportunities to request reasonable accommodations that will provide equity for us in schools, in workplaces, and in any other public part of our communities. So we have these.
Let me add one more thing there, which is when we do that advocacy, we are standing on the shoulders of the people in this picture. We are standing on the shoulders of wheelchair users and the blind and the deaf communities, all these people who I think sometimes we think a disability is weakness, but when we see pictures like this, we see that it's empowerment and it's activism.
For sure. Thank you, Nina, for adding that follow-up piece. And now we're going to hear from Carl, and we're going to get into talking about how the ADA defines disability.
Awesome. Thank you, Pam and Nina. Those were really good segues into this slide that I'm going to talk about now with you in terms of how the ADA defines a disability. So I think it's really important for us to understand the particular way that the ADA defines a disability. So there's one mindset of it being a legal definition, and the other is a medical definition. For the sake of the ADA defines a disability in a legal one versus a medical context. And because of this, the ADA defines it differently than how a disability may be defined or viewed under different laws, such as how the Social Security Administration would determine what benefits a disabled person may qualify for. You know, to get more information on this, in including a bit more of the context that's on this slide in terms of, you know, having a record of an impairment or being regarded as having a disability. There's a really good website that I've referenced that has a wealth of resources and information that would cover a lot more of this topic than we have time to share today. And that is that's adata.org. That's a really great resource that provides information, training, and guidance on the ADA as well, if you'd like to dive into that a little bit more. But now I'm going to toss it back over to Pam, and she's going to talk about certain protections that we have under the ADA.
Thank you, Carl. And just as a reminder for everyone, just check that if you're not speaking, that your mic is actually muted. So one of the things, well, the main thing that the ADA provides is protection, and protections from exclusion and discrimination. So basically what that means is we have the legal right to govern our own lives. We, the people that have a disability, we who stutter or are blind or are deaf or use a wheelchair, we are the ones that have the power to say what we need and ask for that. We don't need to have other people speaking for us. The ADA also rejects the medical model of disability. And for me, what that really means is we're not broken in need of fixing. The ADA has basically empowered us to contribute to society, work, school, community, as we are. So we're not looking to be fixed. We're looking to figure out how we best can contribute, because we have to remember that it's not just about disability, it's about the different abilities that we all bring. Again, specifically the ADA, the goal is to create meaningful, equal opportunities everywhere in our lives. And as we've mentioned one other place already, the ADA prohibits, it's against the law to discriminate against people with disabilities at work, public buildings, transportation, schools, both K through 12, and colleges and universities. One of the things that I like to say, pardon me, about stuttering, it's really easy to accommodate for stuttering. We don't have to spend $500 to install a wheelchair ramp. For stuttering, basically all that's needed is time, patience, and respect. Let us say what we have to say and what we know to say, and just give us the time and the respect to do that. So it's really inexpensive to accommodate people who stutter. Nina is going to go on now to talk about how this actually works.
So the ADA bans discrimination based on disability in the areas of employment, public accommodation, public services, transportation, and telecommunications. And telecommunications, as our technology changes, I think that will be an interesting one for people who stutter to be included in on, because if it breaks on us, it's going to break on someone else too, in terms of voice recognition and things like that. And I think it's important to know that when you adjust to a disability, you're actually making it more universally accessible to everybody. So it's a good thing. So also the ADA focuses on whether discrimination occurred, not endless analyzing if a person has a disability. These are legal terms, and so it always applies in different ways, case by case. But the important thing is that an accommodation is provided when it is asked for and when it's necessary. So you don't have to disclose a disability at your job. They still shouldn't be discriminating against you, but if you want an accommodation, you have to disclose and you have to ask for it. People don't read your mind, so they don't know. And that's why I know many of us here on the panel have educated our workplaces or other people's workplaces to spread the word about stuttering and the disabilities in general, because part of that respect is also coming out. And Jonah and I had a great conversation a couple weeks ago about that on the pre-call to all of this. The more that we are out there and that people see us and they hear us talk, the more we're going to change their attitudes. And I think that's a core part of this process.
Thank you, Nina. And I just want to just add again, focusing on Carl, if you could just go back, yeah. I just want to really focus on bullet point number 2. The ADA is not established to determine if we have a disability. That's not the point. The point is to make sure that discrimination does not occur. So the ADA, there's no legislation or binder or handbook that an employer gets to say, this is a disability, this is a disability, this is not. It's all focused on making sure that people are included and that discrimination has not occurred. Next, we're going to hear from Jonah and Alvin on some specific workplace discrimination examples.
Yeah, thanks, Pam. So I'm going to share 2 examples of how stuttering discrimination can show up in the workplace. So the first example took place in 2014 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The city of Milwaukee was hiring 15 spots for firefighters. And one of the candidates was a man who had a fairly severe stutter. And he was one of the highest test scorers, ironically, on the oral exams. He scored extremely high, I believe 95 out of 100. And he was one of the top 10 applicants for one of the 15 spots. But after an interview with a psychologist, the psychologist determined that it was not safe to hire him because his speech would impact his ability to do his job and be able to communicate during emergencies. The man disagreed and sued the city of Milwaukee under the ADA and won. They actually ended up settling outside of court, but that's one example of how discrimination against stuttering can show up. Another example was a more recent example. In 2018, in California, a corrections officer was routinely mocked and teased for his stutter by other coworkers over a 2-year period of time. And for this individual, it created a hostile work environment. He ended up suing his employer, which was the California Department of Corrections, and won. It's good to note that the court noted that since 2 of the mocking incidences took place in front of several other employees and supervisors, a psychologist testified that the totality of the circumstances of being mocked indicates that the harassing conduct was pretty severe. And even though neither plaintiff nor his witnesses could really remember exactly how many times he was mocked or made fun of, or exactly when those incidences occurred, the court found that the employer's culture supported the harassing conduct, and they were found liable. Now, even though the corrections officer did not sue specifically under the ADA, I think we can see how the ADA could have influenced the court's decision, since he did not have the reasonable accommodation of having a psychologically safe work environment. And I'm going to hand it off to Alvin to share his own experience.
But before you do that, Jonah, let me just ask a quick question. How much did he, how much was the settlement that he received? Do you know?
Yeah. The corrections officer, that was $500,000.
That's like pretty amazing. Not to
Yeah.
say that we're all gonna follow suit with, you know, our own discrimination claims, but that's a pretty impressive precedent to have been set in a case of stuttering discrimination at work. So Alvin, share with us.
Yeah, sure, I'll jump in. Yeah, those stories you just heard from Jonah kind of echo with me too. And my personal experience actually predates the ADA. I was coming out of college in the early to mid 1980s. I remember in 1982, I was just completing my sophomore year of college, and I saw an advertisement from the Navy that said, basically, if you would pledge to join the Navy upon completion of your degree, we'll pay you some money up front, and then we'll also pay you some money every month as you continue your education. And that, at the time, I remember, seemed like a very good deal to me, in part because of the money, but I think in my own mind also significantly because I thought, here's a good way to avoid the job interview process that I know we all are somewhat apprehensive about, at least. But anyway, I went down to talk to the recruiter one day after exchanging some information with them, not really realizing I was going to have an interview that day, but I ended up having an interview that day. Talked to 2 Navy captains, and I really struggled with my speech, particularly at that point I was having a lot of trouble with words that begin with the letter F. And I remember one of the captains stopping me and asking me about it, and so I explained that I was a person who stuttered, or at the time I didn't know the phrase person who stuttered, so I said stutterer, I guess, and explained why. And anyway, the captain that day basically said, you know, on paper, you're a great candidate. You have the right classes, you have excellent grades, you haven't been in trouble with the law, any of that, you're an excellent candidate. But he said, we can't get around the speech thing. And he said, I can't in good conscience put you on a ship that might catch on fire and you can't yell fire. And he said, I don't want that on my conscience, and so I'm not going to let you join the Navy, basically. Again, at the time, there was no ADA. I'm not sure I would have known to even look for something like the ADA at that point in my life, but what we did was embark on actually exactly a 2-year program to convince the Navy that I was worth taking a risk on, basically. So got statements of support from every high school teacher I ever had who liked me, and every employer I ever had. Talked to our legislators here in Nebraska and got them to sign letters of support. Drove from Nebraska to the East Coast and spent 8 hours with a speech therapist there who at the end wrote a letter and said, Alvin is cured, basically. And he's came back and did another 8 or 10 minute interview with the captain, and he thought I was cured as well. And so he changed his mind and let me join the Navy. So, you know, I would like to say that the ADA has kept things like that from happening. But the stories you just heard from Jonah indicate that maybe not. You know, I think at this point in my life, I would argue with the captain and say, even if I can't yell fire, I can yell smoke or run or ah, and we end up with the same effect in the end. So anyway, that's my story from way back when.
Okay, and actually, Alvin, you're gonna lead us right into our next point of discussion. Your story kind of led to something pretty significant that you're doing in the workplace. Can you share that with us?
Sure, absolutely. So I did spend 20 years in the Navy, retired from the Navy. I'm still working with the Navy a lot, but now I work for a nonprofit corporation called the MITRE Corporation. I think in part because of the ADA and just part because of other changes in the way the world works, the stuttering that was a huge deal to the Navy is not a huge deal to MITRE and other employers today, along with all the other disabilities. So when I joined MITRE, which has been just about 2 years ago now, I went to a 2-day introduction to how the company runs and what the company stands for and all that stuff. And we had the diversity and inclusion coordinator came and spoke to the group. And so I engaged with her afterwards and asked if they had programs for stutterers or, and at the time they didn't actually. But they said, we have this invisible disabilities employee resource group that we're trying our best to get started. How would you like to be the chairperson of that? So as it ends up, another person talked to the same lady that same day. And so we've ended up as these co-chairs. So we have groups that are tied to hearing loss and vision loss and general anxiety. And my co-chair has severe migraines. And so we have this invisible disability employee resource group that is actually one of the more active employee resource groups at MITRE. In fact, we had Pam came and spoke earlier this year before COVID happened, probably one of the last events before COVID happened, I think. And so we're staying as active as we can. You know, MITRE is primarily like an information technology consultant to the government. And one of the things that MITRE is most interested in, in our diversity and inclusion slogan, somewhere it says words to the effect that diversity and inclusion help us innovate. And so we actually won a grant from the US government to hire people on the autism spectrum and actually use some of the skills that perhaps they have because they are disabled, quote unquote, by being on the autism spectrum. It actually enables them, we think, to do some things even better than people who are not on the spectrum. And so we have this grant to experiment with that. You know, so they're, even though it's not stuttering, it's still neurodiversity, which is pretty closely related to stuttering, I think. And anyway, I'd just say, in the early 80s, being diverse and being disabled was kind of an exclusionary. And now at companies like MITRE, at least, it's almost a way to bring you into the fold. I think that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, and now Jonah is going to talk about similar experiences that he's had at his workplace.
Yeah. So before I talk about my own experiences, I just wanted to riff off of what Alvin was just talking about, how some companies have actually figured out how to do specific D&I and disability hiring pipelines. Companies like Microsoft do this extremely well, where they also have an autism hiring program, because they've discovered that people who are on the autism spectrum have unique skills to do certain things, and they're specifically hiring people with autism for those skills. I think the stuttering community can learn a lot from the autism community too. And if you haven't read Chris Constantino's paper on that, I highly recommend that. At PayPal, we have a pretty typical structure for diversity and inclusion that a lot of other modern corporations have, where we have a D&I team at the enterprise level that are looking after diversity and inclusion from, say, more of the corporate HR perspective, and they've built in the structure and the frameworks for employees to own and operate employee resource groups, also known as ERGs. And so we have ERGs for, I think now we're up to like 8 or 9 different marginalized communities. I co-lead our global diversity, or our global disability inclusion ERG. It's not just focused on the United States. So we, being a global company, not just have to comply with ADA standards, but we have to comply with very strict privacy and information and data retention standards in the European countries, and we have certain disability hiring standards we have to comply with in the Asia Pacific areas, and it makes D&I a very important component to not just the company from a compliance standard, but from an inclusion standard. So, so thinking about the example I shared earlier regarding the corrections officer who won that $500,000 lawsuit, the court specifically called out the employer's culture. So company culture, I think, is a big part of modern D&I. And, our ERGs and our D&I programs are all about influencing corporate culture to create a psychologically safe environment for all of our employees, and being inclusive for all identities, so employees can bring their full selves into the workplace every day. And this is what we call inclusion and belonging. Everyone loves a good origin story. All the great heroes have origin stories, and I like to think of the ADA as the origin story for today's modern disability inclusion programs that a lot of corporations have. So companies like PayPal have robust inclusion and belonging programs because we compete for talent with many other companies. And the more inclusive of a culture a company has, the greater the potential that top talent will want to work there. And if a person can bring their full self into the workplace, they will stay and they will be happy and productive. But we all know it wasn't always that way, and it still isn't always that way everywhere. Companies, I believe, originally started to integrate the diversity and inclusion a long time ago because they needed to protect themselves from liability and to comply with legislation like the ADA. But over time, as they were forced into compliance, companies, especially in the technology industry, realized that their greatest competitive advantage was their people. So talent, the people a corporation employs, makes a difference in a company's ability to innovate, to drive change, and to stay ahead of market conditions. So fast forward to today, and we see companies like MITRE and PayPal and many others have disability inclusion ERGs, which influence the employee life cycle at every stage, from hiring pipelines to alumni programs. And I don't believe any of that would exist if it wasn't for the ADA and for all those people who made the ADA happen.
Thank you, both Alvin and Jonah, for sharing the outstanding diversity and inclusion programs that you're both an integral part of. Next, we're going to talk about some personal examples, and Jonah, I'm going to call right back at you for you to kind of share a little bit about what your early experience with stuttering at work was.
Yeah, so here I am today, a proud NSA chapter leader, a proud stutterer, an advocate for disability inclusion in the workplace. My goal is that all people with disabilities are able to fully participate in the global economy. But it wasn't always that way at all. And in fact, it wasn't until after 13 years at my current employer that I became really open and forward and even overt about my stuttering. I used to be much more covert, at least I believed I was. And I just didn't really want to acknowledge that I stuttered, especially in the workplace. I was really battling my own self stigma, which I think is something we all deal with too. But when a former senior executive asked me about my stuttering at a team building event, he pulled me aside and wanted to talk to me about it because his own son stuttered and needed some support and some mentorship making the transition from high school to college. And the opportunity that I was given to help someone else who stuttered, someone who's gone through the things that I've gone through, just sort of opened up the floodgates for me. And that's when I discovered the NSA and my local chapter and joined the disability community at my workplace. And for me, it wasn't that I didn't want to come out and be proactive about my speech and stuttering and disability inclusion, earlier. And it wasn't that the company culture didn't support me or make me feel psychologically safe, but I was fighting my own self-stigma. Right? I didn't want to acknowledge that I had a disability. I didn't even know stuttering was considered a disability. I didn't know I was protected under the ADA. But it was always there. The ADA was always there for me. I just didn't really realize it at the time. And to my own point about the ADA as an origin story for today's modern disability inclusion and belonging programs, I now realize that the ADA is really the safety net that allows me to be vocal about my disability without stigma, without fear of being harassed or mocked, or fear of retaliation for speaking up and asking for an accommodation, or to make things more accessible, or whatever I need. And so that's really my own experience around that. It's really about my own self discovery, and realizing that the ADA is really what enabled me to be who I am in the workplace today.
Jonah, thank you so much for sharing that. Quick on the spot question, if you don't mind, before we zoom over. But you know, are you well accepted by your colleagues and coworkers as well at work?
Great question. I am, and I always have been. And I feel like now that I no longer try to hide it, and I openly acknowledge or self-disclose. I've self-disclosed before getting up on stage in front of 150 engineers, right? I can do that now. And it's almost like, because I self-disclose, people don't really think it's as big of a deal, and they don't have to ask, and they don't have to question and go, why is his mouth doing that, and what happened to the words coming out? Now they just kind of know, and I have colleagues who really just sort of told me they're very proud to have someone like me add to the diversity of our team at work.
Oh, that is so awesome. Thank you for letting me put you on the spot with that unscripted question.
Sure.
And I'm gonna just skip the order for just a minute. But Carl, you kind of have a similar storyline. Also maybe about not knowing what the ADA could have helped you with, right?
Yeah, so that's true. So my first job out of college, I was actually an admissions counselor for my school. And so I knew a lot of the folks who I would be working with. And essentially what that job is you are traveling across the country and telling, going to schools, going to college fairs, and your job is to basically sell your school to families, to let them know why they would want to come to your school. And I love the college that I went to. I went to a very small private school, and I think this would be a stressful job for even people who don't stutter, because you're trying to convince complete strangers that they should go to some place that's probably hours away from their home, pay $30,000 a year for this, for this education. So it was already a really tough spot. But at that time, I was very much kind of, as Jonah said, I was very much in the closet when it came to my stuttering, and didn't want people to know about it. I thought of it as something that I needed to hide. And that was partially because I hadn't accepted my stuttering myself, but it was also because I was just starting this job. It was my first one out of college. I didn't want people to think that I couldn't do the job. And so, I really hid my stuttering, and I didn't know about the ADA and there being any accommodations that I could ask for at work. So for example, when I would have to make calls to schools to set up events or school visits, which, gosh, I hated. I didn't know that I, could ask to, do it in a private room, or that I could go somewhere private to make these calls, so that it wouldn't be as stressful of a scenario for me. And so, I just worked myself up into so much stress. It got to the point where at night I couldn't go to sleep because I would be thinking about all the things that I have to do the next day, all of the talking, and it was just got to be too much. And so I actually ended up resigning from that job. And I got to a point where I was in such a deep funk and a deep depression. And I asked myself, like, what am I going to be able to do? Like, I have to be able to talk. I don't know what I'm going to be able to do. I don't know if I'll ever have a job that will be something that is a fulfilling job, something that I'll enjoy. But my next job, I knew that I needed one. And so I actually ended up working in a call center back home, which I'm sure no one would have ever thought that. I wouldn't have thought that, but it was a job and I needed a job. And so that was one of my most favorite roles because I got to practice talking on the phone. I had to go into work and face my fear every day. And I got comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think, for me, it just took me getting to a point of where I felt like, you know what, if you have a disfluent moment or a few at work, it's okay. You're not any less of a person. You're still fully capable to do this job. You know the information, and people just want to get the information from you. And as Jonah said, I think that for me, disclosure was a huge thing. When I was comfortable letting people know that I stuttered, and I didn't do it in an apologetic way. I kind of just said, "Hey, I'm Carl and I stutter." That was such a huge thing because it let people know that I was okay with it, and because I was okay with it, they were okay with it. But I oftentimes think back to my first job, and I said, if I knew more about the ADA and the protections it provided and the accommodations that I was able to use, I wonder, how different my career trajectory or my life would have been if I, hadn't left and if I had decided to pursue that. So yeah, a little bit about my story.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. Disclosure takes a lot of guts, but the dividends and the payout, as we're seeing as we share, are just so worth it. Nina, you had an experience with the ADA and grad school. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I'm sure other people might be thinking, well, am I going to get to something besides the workplace?
Yeah, no, and I think, and I really wanted to emphasize it's the ADA and Section 504, which is part of the Rehabilitation Act. And if any college accepts any kind of federal funds, such as student aid, they should have been made accessible since 1973, not 1990. A lot of them haven't really practiced that. So I wanted to make sure that was out there. I'm also putting in the chat a article. If you are a mafia movie fan, you may especially like it. It is an article that I wrote with my friend Gina titled "Everything We Needed to Know About Stuttering in College We Learned from Mafia Movies." So it's kind of bringing in those elements in film, but also how to advocate in school. So I wanted to share that. for me, there were a couple weird things that happened when I was in grad school. I went to University of Berkeley and community college for my undergrad, which was great. It was fabulous. Berkeley has gotten their pantsuit a number of times, which has made them very accessible. And so, and also it's that culture of bringing in the diversity there. At least in the 90s, there was a bit of that. But then I went to a private school for my grad school to get my doctorate in psychology. And there I had some weird experiences. And one of the experiences was in an interviewing class where the teacher said, because we didn't get grades, we got these written evaluations. And the teacher said, student stutters when she talks when she's anxious. I stutter all the time. But it's really good that she's able to talk about this. And I felt very uncomfortable at the time having this on my record. Not that I stutter, but the assumptions about why I stuttered, because they were completely wrong. And they were not what I told him. And that was the thing that was very frustrating. I was like, yeah, I stutter. I don't know how to, kind of integrate this in. And so that was weird. And I could have gone back and challenged that. If I needed to, I would have, but I talked to a mentor at the time and it didn't seem worth my time. But that was the kind of stuff that I was very anxious about. In the chat, I've been noticing people saying, like, do you disclose? When do you disclose? Do you let them know? I had one experience that I wanted to share. And keep in mind, this was in 1999 when I was applying for internships. I had to apply. I applied to 10 internships, and that right there might have been an accommodation where maybe I was able to apply to 15 because of the discrimination that I might meet once I was at these jobs. And also sometimes like people in speech pathology who stutter, grad students, they have experienced some levels of discrimination. So I just, just because people understand what stuttering is doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to discriminate. And the research around attitudes toward people with disabilities say that if you have a peer who stutters, or like a mentor or a boss or a parent or someone of some power, that your attitudes toward a disability change. But if you have a client or a student with a disability, it may not change. So that's why it's so important to have people who stutter in grad schools, people who stutter coming up, because they're the ones who are going to educate people to show what the possibilities are. And so when I applied for my internship, I was like, oh yeah, I stutter and I have dyslexia, and I bring this experience into these schools. I was applying to a lot of colleges for an internship, and of the 10 that I applied to, I disclosed on 9. I got 2 interviews, the one that I did not disclose on, and the one that was the one that I would eventually get, which was a deaf-centered place. So they really wanted someone who had disability experience. But for me, it's that question of, can they discriminate against you? Of course they can. But how are you going to handle it? And that is discrimination without them knowing it. That's why when I apply for these things, what I'll do is I'll put, oh, I'm a volunteer at the National Stuttering Association. We all know that if you're not an SLP, you either stutter, or you're a parent of a kid who stutters, or a partner. Like, you got some inside stuff. So it's my way of disclosing without disclosing, is putting that information down. But then as soon as I get into the room, like for my last job interview, it was with the president and the vice president of the school that I now work at. I sat down, they asked me the first question, and I didn't put anything about stuttering on my application. But when I got there, I said, I stutter, and you're just going to have to wait for all my brilliant ideas. And that was my way of saying, shut up, let me talk. And I'm really smart. I am very well qualified, but, and so telling them how to think about stuttering. And for me, those are some of the ways that I have tried to combat the discrimination that I might experience. And I have found that academia, unfortunately, offers more chances for discrimination than the stand-up comedy world. So stand-up comedy, I have had less examples of that. So it's very interesting based on where you are.
Nina, thank you so much for sharing that, and also skillfully weaving in about the 504 protections, which are really important for grade school kids. So we're going to wrap up this section with me sharing a personal example. So both Jonah and Carl talked about disclosure. The first job that I got out of college, I worked for a program for at-risk youth, which was residential. So we had dorms and everything. And it was a program that was subcontracted out through the Department of Labor. First job out of college, I did not disclose that I stutter. I was deeply covert at that part of my life, and I found myself rising through the ranks. I was promoted a couple times, from a resident advisor in the dorm to a counselor to counseling supervisor, and had established a pretty decent track record for myself as the quiet one, as the diligent one, as, you know, somebody that didn't have much to say in meetings, but damn, she could write a memo, you know, and I had kind of, you know, like carved out this way of surviving every day. But I was working with at-risk kids, and at-risk kids have a bunch of issues on their own. So I think sometimes when I wasn't effective with hiding my stuttering and it would come out, the kids would be okay with that because they saw an adult who was being vulnerable with them, and showing that it was okay for me to have something because they all had something. A lot of the kids were ADHD, lots of kids that you know, had to, you know, some of their accommodations included getting up out of class and taking a walk every 5 minutes or so. So for some way, even though I did not talk about it or disclose in the formal way, many of the students that I worked with knew that I stuttered. So I'd been at this job 20 years, and we had a major shakeup in management. For 20 years, we'd been run by the same operator that was subcontracted out to the DOL, and a new company won the bid. So all of a sudden, when that happens in that type of a setting, all the head honchos are let go, from the, you know, the CEO to the HR people. Everybody is let go, and the new company brings in all of their people. So I suddenly got a new boss, 20 years in, and this guy and me were like a bull in the china closet. it really didn't have too much to do with stuttering. He just didn't like me. And that's going to happen from time to time. But as I was getting older, I was not as successful anymore with hiding my stuttering. And he began hearing it sometimes when I was asked to cover a class, and he would come in and observe. He would hear me stuttering. So out of the blue, one day after 21 years of working there, I was called up to the center director's office. My boss and the HR person were there in the room, and you can just tell something's going down, something's going to happen. And I was told that I was being terminated. And the primary reason was poor communication skills, and I was a poor role model for the students that I worked with. How can that be? I've been there 20 years. Why all of a sudden am I a poor role model? But this guy didn't like me, and he had picked up on a vulnerability and a weakness. So on May 4th, 2006, I found myself being escorted down to my office, packing up all my stuff in the middle of the day. So there were students walking by, there were staff walking by. I was not allowed to talk to anyone, not allowed to grab anything off my computer. I felt like a criminal, essentially. And one staff person did walk by, and she said, "It's not because of your stuttering, was it?" And that blew me away, because I'm thinking that nobody knew because I didn't talk about it. So I'm let go. The next day, I'm like freaking out because I didn't have anywhere to go, nothing to do. Like my purpose had been stripped of me. But that experience propelled me into looking up on the internet, typing in stuttering in Google for the first time. I found the NSA. This was in May. I found myself flying across the country in June to attend my first NSA conference. Found myself at a workshop called Covert Exposed, and suddenly realized what had happened and what I had been doing for all these years. And then I got angry and I filed a complaint of discrimination with the EEOC. Now, bear in mind, this was in 2006. The ADA was enacted in 1990, so there were some protections. So similar to what Carl shared, had I known that, and had I known that if I had disclosed that I stuttered, that the trajectory might have been different. But I filed a formal complaint with the EEOC, attained an attorney, and set out to make the case that firing somebody because they stutter is unacceptable and it's discrimination. It was a long process, and for healing to happen, I made the decision that I was not going to go on this grueling walk with them. My attorney had said, because the discrimination was not as egregious as racial discrimination or sexual discrimination, it would take forever and I wouldn't get much money. So after 2.5 years, we settled. And why was that important? Because to me, having them agree to a settlement meant a victory, that they acknowledged in some way some doing. So I got, I got a minor settlement. Trust me, I did not get rich out of this, but I set an example, I set a precedent, and I also promised myself that if I ever had the opportunity to use that experience of being fired because of stuttering, that I would. And when I got involved in the NSA, 7 or 8 years later, I've been one of the drivers behind this We Stutter at Work. And had I known then that this would have led to this type of an experience where other people now know that that is not acceptable, again, my life journey as a person who stutters certainly would have been different. So wow, we have covered a lot. We talked about wanting to be at about an hour or so of content, so we're a little over that, but we don't have a set time here to end. But I know the chat box has been going crazy, so we do want to take some time, if people are interested, to take some questions from you. I'll ask Carl to maybe stop the screen share for a moment, and then we'll come back. But we'd love to hear people ask a question. You can either raise your hand and ask it, or write it in the chat box, whatever might work best. I know we've got a lot of content that we covered.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the live stream on Facebook, just so people feel comfortable asking and all that stuff. So.
Yeah. So Kunal, sure.
One question I had for you is, just from your experience, just I'm speaking with many other people who stutter as well, during the interview process, is there any kind of reasonable accommodation that you've heard people who stutter have asked for prior to the actually having the interview itself? So we'd love to hear from you on that, just kind of prior to the interview, as opposed to coming on the interview and just mentioning, hey, I stutter, and I'd appreciate if you give me more time.
Yeah, I'll take that one, and then if anybody else on the panel wants to jump in with that. I have heard and actually recommend it. There, in this day and age, the way that recruiters work with people to interview and fill jobs, mostly the first interview is done by the phone. And as we know, as people who stutter, the phone can be very challenging. So I've heard and suggested people to ask if they can have a face-to-face interview and bypass the phone interview, which in doing so, you then have to take that ownership, because chances are they're going to ask you why. So it's a great opportunity then for you to empower yourself to say that you stutter, and that it would be an easier experience and more effective for you to do it in person. Others on the panel that might have another example?
Well, I've never heard of any specific example, but I think it's a really great question. and it's something I've been thinking about too. All the professional talent acquisition people I've ever spoken to say that they work in a very high volume, fast-paced environment. You might have one recruiter at a company hiring for like 20, 25 different positions at the same time, getting thousands of candidates in and out and screening them. I think it's to Pam's point, it is an opportunity for self-disclosure. At my age today, I'm comfortable saying I don't want to work for an employer that wouldn't want me there. But it wasn't always that way, and that doesn't apply to everyone. I think it is very important to start self-disclosing at that point. I think it's absolutely reasonable to ask for maybe a little more time. If you've got a 20-minute telephone screen scheduled, ask for half an hour. It's really not that much. And if they're so unwilling to give you an extra 10 minutes to talk, I mean, probably not a corporate culture that you want to be a part of. And to most of the TA people I know, they'd be happy. They'd be more than happy to accommodate you. You just have to ask.
Mm-hmm. And Jonah, that invites a great segue for me to just throw out there to you guys all participating. The NSA offers mock interviews. So because we know that viewing is very stressful for anybody, but particularly as a person who stutters. So we offer the opportunity for you to practice an interview with, we have a 10-person volunteer team, and you can choose to practice the interview over the phone or via video chat. And we have found that a lot of people have really found that to be helpful and empowering, because chatting with another person who stutters, you can talk about when do you do the disclosure? At the beginning of the interview? Do you kind of wing it and wait until a stutter comes out and then you disclose it? So it's good to be able to discuss that with others that have been there. And Allison mentioned had a question in the chat box. When you ask if you can have a in-person interview as opposed to a phone one, Allison asks, well, what if they refuse that? So then I would go back to what Jonah just said. Well, it's probably not the place that we'd want to work there. And anyway, if you get the sense that they wouldn't even be willing to accommodate in the pre-employment part, and remember, the ADA protections go for the entire job process. So it's pre-employment, employment, promotions, and but again, the whole onus here is we have to feel comfortable speaking about what our needs are and asking for those accommodations.
Yeah, and I would add, don't assume a company won't accommodate you. I would say make sure you push them to the point where they have to make the conscious choice to not accommodate you. And maybe a light bulb will go off and someone will go, oh, wow, I'm not accommodating a person with a disability. That's probably a bad idea.
Yeah. Other people, other questions? Yeah.
There's a really great question from Leslie that I would like to take.
Please.
In the chat. And that is, sometimes when a student is in college, they want an accommodation, but they would have to disclose to the Office of the Disabilities Services. And many times students will feel that they're cheating the system in some way if they do that. And I really wanted to address this both as a person who stutters, but also a person who has dyslexia, that like when I read at 110 words a minute. When I read with my device here that reads out loud, I read at 350 words a minute. I can process the information. I just need that extra time. And, you know, sometimes people are like, well, you know, you don't want an accommodation to be a crutch. But some people need a crutch, and that's okay. And so I think it's important for us to challenge our own attitudes around disabilities and help people to others to kind of move to that place where if you need that, like a blind person is not going to be able to read something without something on the computer read out loud, and they can do it independently, but they need those tools. And it's not taking away from something. It is it is allowing an even playing field so that people can prove what their talents and their abilities are. And sometimes it takes a while to get there, especially I come from a working class Italian family that was like, no, you got to do it on your own. And my parents weren't, but some of my extended family were. And it's like, no, you need to prove what you know. And if you can get that on a ramp, because these are all just ramps that a person who uses a wheelchair would use, we need a different kind of ramp. And actually those things that help me as a person with a disability is going to help everybody. And that's why everybody now everybody uses Audible books. So that is a good example there.
Yeah, great. And it just reminds me, and I'm going to throw this out and share. I remember after getting fired from the job, you know, that I had for 20 years. First of all, that was in May, and I had the best summer of my whole entire life. That summer, I had never been off for 3 or 4 months. I had just moved into an apartment complex that had a swimming pool. So like when the anger and the depression and stuff kind of like settled, I enjoyed my summer. That just like crazily just popped into my head. But one of the first interviews that I had after that experience, five months later, I went and applied for a job with a ARC, it used to be called Association for Retarded Children, but they don't call it that anymore. But it was sadly still called that then. So I went for the interview. It was an in-person one. There were 3 people, and why I decided to do this, I'm not sure, but I brought along with me a copy of Dr. Seuss's book, Oh, the Places You'll Go. And that had always been a favorite of mine when I was working with high school age students. You know, you have your whole life ahead of you, you know, blah, blah. So during the interview, I had a professional portfolio with me, and I had the book right underneath the portfolio. And several times during the interview, I would pull the portfolio off the book so that the book became more visible. And until I finally saw somebody couldn't stand it anymore, and they wanted to know what did they have the book there for. And I had already disclosed that I stutter in that session, and I just shared with them. I said, you know, I've gotten so much empowerment from sharing this with young people who think that they are limited to what they can do and where they can go in life. And I think it's a powerful lesson, no matter what age you are. And I said, I was just, I just thought I would bring it as an example of, what I could bring to your agency. So they asked me to read the book during the interview, and I did. Every page, stuttered on a lot of the words, because you can't switch Dr. Seuss's words. 3 days later, they called and offered me the job. So I don't know if that was part of it, but I think they had a lot of respect for the fact that I put myself out there, and I owned who I was, every part of me. Thank you, Haley. Haley said in the chat, awesome. We do have a few minutes if anybody else has any other questions. Did anybody on the panel scan anything in the chat that we should address?
Yeah.
Oh, please.
I was going to say, where was it up here? Lisa Hudson had a great question. What questions do you guys get applying for a job upon knowing you stutter? And then there's another reply down below from Haley about, employers are not allowed to actually ask you about it. So you have to disclose it. And Haley has an excellent point there, that if you don't disclose, they get to make assumptions, right? And you don't want that. I also have to point out, Carl made a great comment that as a person who stutters, you get to talk about overcoming adversity, humility, and drive. Those are excellent talking points in any job interview. And so you have this thing that you can talk about that makes you sound like someone who has overcome hard obstacles, and you have. So use it to your advantage.
And there's also a question from, it was back here, Lisa, who is 18 and asking about how to get work experience. And that's also, I think, something to look toward internships for. And like Coca-Cola has an internship specifically for disabled college students. And there are some policy internships. There is one right now, I think it's for people wanting to break into the entertainment business. No, it's actually communications and media. So it may be a lot to be in school, but you can also get credits for an internship. And that's how I did everything. Was I didn't like to read and to write papers and stuff like that, but I love to have hands-on experiences, and you can get credits towards your degree with that hands-on experience, and perhaps working with a corporation that offers diversity and inclusion as part of that.
Awesome questions. This has been such a great discussion. We want to make sure that anybody that wants to ask another question, that you have time to, because we do have a few minutes. Anybody else?
There's one from Carlos that I haven't processed it because I have dyslexia, but one of you may want to take a look at it.
Let's see. Carlos, I'll just read it out loud. So Carlos's question about the ADA, just recently he was in an interview process with a big philanthropy organization. He disclosed during the process for the first time that he is a person who stutters. He just found out that he is no longer in the process. He asked for feedback about my interview. under the ADA, can they say my stutter is one of the reasons that I can't continue in the process? Wow, good question. Nina, have you processed that yet?
Yeah, no, now I'm just angry. No, and if they say that, if they say you can't continue because of anything, that is, if you are otherwise qualified, you should continue on. And if they say that you can't because you stutter, that is like any other protected class. That it sounds like discrimination to me. Now, if it's for an air traffic controller, might be a different thing, but for most jobs, it should be fine.
And remember, we can go back to the firefighter example, where the candidate scored like 3rd or 4th on the written exam, but was told that he would not be considered specifically because of his stutter, and he filed a case, and won that case. So I think sometimes you have to like carefully choose your battles, because if Nina says, if it looks like a duck and it acts like a duck, it's a duck. It's discrimination, but we have to be willing to carry that ball. When I entered the journey, which was 2.5 years for my lawsuit, I had to be okay with constantly talking about I'd been discriminated against because of stuttering. I could not bring it up anymore, and it's hard for people who stutter, because we have that public stigma and the personal stigma. So many of us think, we get what we deserve because we're not qualified, because we can't do this, that, or the other thing. And that's just not true.
There's also another really good question, I think, COVID kind of question, which is, can I ask my boss if I want to work on site, because working from home seems to be associated with more stuttering. And I believe that STAMA, which is the British Stammering Association, did a survey of their people who said that their stuttering has gone up between Zooms and masks and all those things that we're, so focused on what we're trying to say. And then we got to think about a mask in our face and all of that, which you should still wear. But any thoughts about that in terms of working from home, working from work? What do you think?
Well, James, I think you can ask if you can work on site as opposed to working from home, because you said in your question that, that you're associating that with more stuttering. So you're specifically stating why you're asking to have that kind of accommodation made. So yes, you can ask, and if they value you as an employee, they should accommodate that.
And one thing I know for me, my secondaries have gone out the door during COVID, because I'm on an internet phone line, and like I'm hearing myself, and that's supposed to help, but it doesn't. And then I start to like march in my seat trying to get out words, and just to acknowledge that it is hard. And I think it's important to know that it's hard for a lot of us, and like I'm trying to fight to not have some of those habits come back, and I was even gonna look into speech the therapy, but also just to be aware of those things and find the kind of support that you need, because I think a lot of us are experiencing that.
I just want to call out to James's question. Yeah, that from business perspective and from like a management perspective, I think that is an absolutely a reasonable accommodation, right? Just work in the office instead of wherever you're at. But if you can't, right, if they can't allow you in the building yet, then obviously you can't yet. I've been a remote employee talking on conference calls and video calls now for 13 years. So COVID really hasn't changed anything for me, except I have these other people in my house, and they're kind of annoying. But I totally get that telephones and conference calls are hard. I keep staring at myself, right, and my stuttering. It also takes a lot of practice, and it does become more comfortable. So I would say if you're feeling highly uncomfortable being a person who stutters in this Zoom call environment, practice with other people who stutter. Go to your NSA chapter meetings. Go to other NSA chapter meetings. You can come to the Portland one on Tuesday at 7 p.m. Pacific time. Email me and I'll give you the Zoom link. But practice, because in all the conversations I've been a part of in my company, there's a lot of companies talking that this is not going away. We're not all going back to offices and everything else after this. Some of us are, some of us aren't. So I would just heed that advice to figure out, how do you adjust? How do you adapt? And as a person who stutters, I know we're all very capable of adaptation.
Joseph Clayton has raised a hand. Joseph.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to actually, I have a lot on my mind, and we don't have a whole lot of time, but during the time home, well, I mean, per se, I am a person who stutters and have my whole life. I've been home like everybody else, of course. I work remotely, and it's actually helped me a lot in a way to slow down and discover myself a bit more, and what, you know, and it's made me realize a lot about myself. And I was actually asked at work to become a group lead. And what that entails is having people under me now who I will more or less be the face of HR. So to me, it's a new experience. And I'll be managing people now, and normally I just had to manage myself, even in my old job. So it's becoming more challenging now, but I knew it was time to take on that challenge. So it just may be, it's more disclosure, really. And I'm about to embark as well on an effort I'm making at work, which has been delayed over and over. And I thank you for, having this, Pamela and Jonah, and Carl, and Alvin, because I've been wanting to grow more for a while, and it just has. And what's happened here is, you've said a platform now that we could build on more, and to educate more, and to be advocates more, and to have more of a a voice in our places of work. And not only that, you know, wherever we are. But I like to ask, what kind of help or support would I be able to get now as I embark now on more of a management role? Because I know I'm going to be challenged much more, and people know at work I have a stutter, and you know, and by the way, we make more of it than it truly is. A lot of times, I know I have many of times, and a big thing for me was, you know, having a respect of my colleagues. And in my mind, I still don't have enough respect, but yet I'm told I do. So I'm like, well, thank you, but we have to feel that though, right? We have to feel we are respected. So I just, you know, it's new for me. It's new for me, and it's a period in my life where I like to grow, and it's a little scary, you know. Even even at the effort that I am making at work, it's scary. So, you know, what Jonah has done, it's admirable, and a lot of us here in the NSA we're making a lot of moves, a lot of taking a lot of initiatives that will all help our youth, you know, and that's what it's really about too. But it's, you know, I've been challenged my whole life with this. I've gone up and down. I've gotten depressed. I've bounced back many of times, like a lot of us have. And, you know, it is scary. So I just, you know, the NSA means a lot to me. And, you know, with this ADA out there and the knowledge now, I have more. It just helps, you know, to have, again, more of a solid ground to kind of stand on and say, hey, we're okay. We'll be okay. We have protection if we need it, but the main thing is we have to be able to put ourselves out there, you know. So I know I have a lot of thoughts, and I tend to ramble, but thank you everybody, and you know, I look forward to working with Pam and Jonah and Carl as well to really you know, to spread stuttering education awareness and help others. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Joseph. And yes, Joseph and I have talked a number of times about getting a employee resource group for stuttering started in his workplace. So the NSA has these resources. So, you know, don't be afraid to, you know, ask us to brainstorm things with you. Pamela has a hand raised. Please.
Hi. Oh, I just want to say this. I didn't say this is my first time attending. Now I'm getting emotional because I wish we had all this when we were kids. I wish we didn't have to go through it alone. And I am getting emotional. Okay, sorry. I am so grateful for this, and I'm so glad, even though I was a little late because I had it on my phone, but I forgot. But anyways, I'm here, and I'm so glad that we have a community here. And I used to talk to that person who stutters as well on the phone, and I was telling her that like I didn't get to choose my degree of how I stutter. Air, not. I hate ST. I hate saying that word. And I realized I'm good at that game. What is it? Like taboo, because I substitute words all the time. I have to go around the word because I don't want to say the word. So I was gonna say I'm so happy I got to attend and to listen to everybody talk about and jobs like not right now, but currently I'm working at a theme park as a costume dresser. And for the interviews I've had in general, like I did tell the person interviewing me that usually I say speech impediment because it's easier for me to say speech impediment than the ST word. I work on that, but I've found that for the years I've been working, like the majority of people of my coworkers, they're fine with it. I hate the phone, but sometimes I'm like, okay, I could say like, hello, so where I'm working at, and say, like, oh, the silence when or someone, I'm getting used to when people hang up on me, and I'm like, if someone hangs up on me, I'll call them again. If it's important, I will call them again because you know what, our voice matters, and because everyone has different experiences. I spent so much of my life not speaking much. I would write things down all the time and having a thing in a crutch and just realizing that with this whole pandemic, like I want to keep finding my voice and and if I have to talk to someone, I have to when I need to talk to someone, I can create with what I say to have, and I stand my ground, and even if I'm not yelling, to make our voices full of this energy, because when someone who has like so much confidence and who's a speaker, because they can send their energy like, hey, listen to me, my voice right now is important, what I have to say is important. And it is, I'm just so happy to meet everybody from wherever you are and sending positive energy, and I'm so glad that we're not alone, because I really wish we all had this when we were young and we didn't have to go through all experiences. But again, I wouldn't want to wish what I have away, and it's taken me a long time to figure that out, because I'm okay, because this has made me not give up. If someone says, oh, you can't do this because of my speech impediment, which I've said that to myself a lot of times, but now I'm like, no, if you can say you can't do it, I'll prove you wrong, and I'm okay with that. Like, and it just makes me want to fight more to prove them wrong, but also prove myself like I could do it. I am stronger, like mentally, physically, than I think I am, and we could do this. Like whatever field you want, we could do this. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela. And yeah, that's really what it's all about, right? Like digging deep and saying what we have to say, even if it means saying it 20 times, like that's really awesome that you've begun to embrace that self-empowerment. We have one more question. James wants to ask a question. So just unmute yourself, James, and ask away.
Hi. Do you mean Laverne James?
No, James Thomas.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
So I was involved in a certain situation where I was asked by my boss to work nights, and I knew this was going to be a problem with my fluency, because when I'm tired and I'm isolated, basically working by myself, I would stutter, and like nothing was working. It was almost like they were more concerned about making money than that. And I contacted a labor lawyer. Some really big deal guy from Long Island, and he was like, he's like, it's much easier to convince your boss that the ADA stuff, that if they can work with you, as opposed to suing them. He said being adversarial should probably be left for the last step, because basically it was going to cost me $600 an hour to consult with him and this and that, and this could take forever, and they have very, very deep pockets. So basically that's what I did. I went in the next day, and I met with the boss, and I told him this, and it worked. But I have been in those situations where speaking about this stuff is it's very, very difficult to do, because everybody knows that you stutter, yet you have to tell people like that doing this kind of stuff would make things much harder. But you also don't want to go out of your way and say, I want to volunteer to come in every day so I can be with people, instead of waking up at 8 o'clock in the morning, then I have to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning. So you can't have it both ways, you know. Anyway, I thought this was very helpful. Thanks so much. I really appreciate that you guys have done this. Thanks.
Thank you. And we have time for one more question. So we will take Laverne James's question as we come up to the 2-hour mark.
Okay. Thank you. I've been temporarily furloughed. It's been extended until October now. I noticed since I've been furloughed, my stuttering has increased. It's like I really, I'm not making a real effort to practice my targets. I know I can at any time. It's like I'm being kind of lazy. I guess, since I don't have to work, just watch TV. My husband and I just watch TV and all. Back in 1983, I went to Norfolk, Virginia. I enrolled in the precision fluency shaping program in Norfolk, Virginia, with Ross Barrett for 3 weeks. It was extremely helpful. The 3 main targets are stretch syllable targets, full breath, and gentle onsets. So when I do practice, I practice those 3 targets, and I usually get back on track for quite a while. Eventually, I start to relapse over a period of time. So that's the main thing. I've just been, not really practicing. I'm okay with that right now. I'm so glad to be a part of this meeting. I'm so glad I had bought a webcam. Now I can join a lot of these meetings. And I see my picture up there. The few times I joined, my picture wasn't being shown. A friend of mine told me I have to keep the camera off. Then when I join, then the picture, my picture will pop up. And now I know what to do now. So I just want to say I'm very, happy to be a part of this meeting, and any more that come up, I'll definitely be participating. In the virtual lounge, that's July 31st. I'll be there. Yeah. So thank you, everybody, and the panelists. You all have done a wonderful job. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laverne, and we will take this opportunity to end at this point. I do want to say that there's been a ton of great content in the chat box session, and we will make the recording of this webinar available for everyone within about a week, as well as we'll clean up the chat transcript and we will send that out to everybody else as well. I did type in the chat box because we lost our PowerPoint ability, but fortunately we got through everything. I did type in the chat box the website that we got a lot of our information today from, adaanniversary.org. And I also want to just remind people that www.westutter.org career success has all of the previous webinars that we've done in the past. Stay tuned for the last Tuesday in August. We're having a great webinar on unpacking career barriers for people who stutter. One of the members of our We Stutter at Work team will be leading that. And I would just like to thank everybody on the panel. This was just an amazing time today. Nina, Carl, Jonah, do you have any final words?
I just want to say thanks for the opportunity. I found this very valuable also. And it was a real pleasure. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you for joining us. You added so much to our discussion today. Great insights.
And I am adding the Facebook feed in case anyone wants to share it or they want to review anything. And Pam, I'm just gonna clap for you for all the work that you've done and how you have transformed the barriers that you've had to changing things for all of us. And I'm very thankful that you have done that. So appreciate that.
Thank you. And Carl?
Yeah, I was just gonna say thank you, Pam. You've been a great resource to me, especially since I've joined the board as my co-chair, and to Nina and Jonah and Alvin, who left a little bit ago. I mean, it's been really great for me to learn from you guys and your experience. I was telling a friend earlier that I didn't think I should be on this panel because I felt like I had a case of imposter syndrome just because of all of you guys' experience. But it's just been a really great time, and we've had a lot of really great questions and comments, and it's just been awesome.
Yeah, it has. Could everybody just unmute themselves right now and just say goodbye? And we spent 2 hours together here today, so thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you all for
Thank
coming.
you
all so much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Hi, everybody.